Developed developed in Africa. We migrated out of Africa 100,000 years ago or so, first to Europe, then to and southern Asia, into northern part of Siberia, across the ice gap into North America, down into South America, across the oceans into Australia, and ultimately the islands of the South Pacific. We've been a very successful species. I argue in part because of our ability to deal with water, our ability to deal with the hydrologic cycle. And that's the first stage of water. I could talk a lot more about the first stage of water, but I don't really want to, except that water was also critical for the first empires. And the first human empires in Mesopotamia and in China and in southern Asia and in India, in the Indus Valley, were formed along the great rivers because water, again, was so critical to their ability to grow food for those growing empires and to manage those empires. And so, again, the first age of water was the evolution of humanity, the creation of the first empires, the first manipulation of water, in a sense, from an engineering point of view, the very first dams, the very first irrigation systems that would move water from where we got it to where we really wanted it. That was the first age. And in my book, I argued that the first age came to an end when populations really started to outgrow their water resources, when we needed more in an engineering and science and societal and institutional perspective than the first age provided. And the second age of water, which in some ways, I describe as our age. We're all children of the second age of water, but the second age of water involved the big engineering design projects of the Romans and the Greeks to move water long distances in remarkable infrastructure by gravity alone. The first dams to generate hydroelectricity. This is a slide from Leonardo da Vinci's journals in which he categorizes some of the engineering designs of the times in the 1500s to move water, to lift water, to generate power for milling. Um, uh, and Leonardo, of course, was one of the great first. I mean, you really have to call him an engineer. He was an artist. He was a Renaissance man. But the Renaissance really was a time when the science and the technology and chemistry and physics all coalesced around water to build the kinds of systems that we now depend upon. The big dams that generate electricity. Three Gorges, the biggest dam on the planet. So big it's actually influencing the rotation of the planet because of the storage of water in one spot. But to store water in wet periods so we can use it in dry periods to protect us from floods and droughts. The first science to understand what water-related diseases were. In the 1850s, I tell the story in the book about John Snow, a wonderful story if you haven't read it yet, about the discovery of what really caused cholera, that it wasn't an airborne disease, it wasn't from garbage, it was a waterborne disease. And that was part of the science of the revolution of understanding water. The big wastewater treatment plants now that we build to collect the wastes that we generate and dump into our water systems so that we can purify that water. And again, as somebody said in this very introductory talk that I was just listening to, the conversation that you were already starting to have, we can now treat this water to any standard we want. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The irrigation systems. 80% of the water that humans use today goes to agriculture to grow the food that we need. The other 20% is used in our homes and industries and commercial sector. But 80% of the water withdrawals goes to agriculture. And so our ability to mobilize water to grow food, to pump groundwater, to deliver water to the agricultural fields in times when rain doesn't come, but when the crops need it, is a revolution from the second age of water. You know, we talk about the green revolution in the agricultural sector as a revolution of irrigation, of uh, fertilizers and pesticides. But I argue it was a revolution of irrigation technology as much as anything else, and our ability to mobilize the water that we need. And in my book, I argue that the second age of water, which brought huge benefits to all of us, that helped us build the society we have now, also brought unintended consequences. In the 1900s, the 1800s and the 1900s and the 20th century, we dumped our wastes in our water resources. We dumped our pollution in our rivers and our lakes. And one of the consequences, of course, was this sort of classic Cuyahoga River fire. This is actually the classic one that most of us remember, some of us remember, or we read about was in the late 1960s. But the Cuyahoga River burned many, many times. This is a photograph from the 1950s. But that pollution episode and that got a lot of attention. That helped stimulate the environmental movement of today. Pollution hasn't stopped, though. This is a photograph from China from a pollution episode. Of course, we now have all sorts of new pollutants that aren't regulated by some of the laws that the environmental movement facilitated, like the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which are foundational federal laws to protect water quality. But they say nothing about plastics. They say nothing about a lot of the new chemicals that are now found or are now causing health problems in our water resources. And another challenge of the second end of the second age of water, and probably one of the greatest in my opinion, is the failure to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone on the planet. And this will get into some of the comments I'll make in a moment about ethics. We know how to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone. We developed that technology in those institutions in the second age of water, and most of us benefit from that. Most of us take that for granted. We turn on the tap in the morning and we get our clean, safe, affordable water, but there are billions of people worldwide that suffer from what I call water poverty. That is, that failure to bring those benefits of the second age to everyone on the planet. And of course, the failure to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone leads to water-related diseases. We know it causes cholera, but we still have cholera and dysentery and typhoid and malaria and the whole suite of things that we have learned about in the second age of water. And I would note that this failure of water poverty is not just a developing country problem. It's a problem here in the richer countries as well. Many of you may know the story of Flint, Michigan, a fairly large city in Michigan that had safe water and sanitation. But because of underinvestment, because of institutional failures, because of some corruption in Michigan at the time, thousands and thousands of people lost access to safe water and sanitation. And it was a terrible crisis at the time. And we've seen this over and over again. We see it now in Jackson, Mississippi. We see it in the Central Valley of California. I live in California with farm worker communities that don't have access to safe water and sanitation. Many Native American communities have never had access to safe water and sanitation, and it's inexcusable. It's certainly a moral failure. It's certainly an ethical failure. It's not that we don't, again, have the technology. It's not that we don't have the money. It's that we have failed institutionally to provide these benefits to everyone on the planet. Some of you may know the Sustainable Development Goals, the goals of the UN, a whole series of them around a whole series of issues, but one of them, SDG 6, is devoted to water. And one of the goals of SDG 6 for 2030, the year 2030, is to provide everyone on the planet with safe water and sanitation. Uh, I don't think we'll meet that target by 2030, but we could. And the fact that the UN has adopted it as a target is an indication, a positive indication of their acknowledgement of how serious dealing with this particular issue is. And of course, another failure of the second age of water is this issue of climate change. We know that climate change is real. We know that humans are causing it. The debate about that is no longer a scientific one. It's unfortunately become a political one. Um, and the legitimate debate is, of course, what do we do about it? That's a social and political and economic debate. But the reality of climate change is a fact. And we also know, and I'm a climate scientist by training. I'm not sure if Kyle mentioned that. I'm a hydrologist and a climatologist. Some of the most important impacts of climate change will be on water resources. The hydrologic cycle that we all remember from second grade, evaporation, formation of clouds, precipitation, runoff back to the oceans, evaporation again. The hydrologic cycle is the climate cycle. We're already seeing higher temperatures has an impact on evaporation rates and water in the atmosphere. We're seeing changes in extreme events, both floods and droughts, as a consequence of climate change. Um, we're seeing changes in water quality. We sort of solved a lot of the Great Lakes water pollution problems with this Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, but some of those problems are reappearing now in the form of toxic algal blooms because of higher temperatures. The impacts of climate change are going on water resources are going to be very, very widespread. And in fact, we're already seeing them. So all of this is sort of a prelude to the bigger conversation that I think you're going to be having, and that I talk about in the book about the third age of water. We need a new age. We need a new water ethic. We need a new way of thinking about uh, solutions to the problems that we've produced at the second age of water. And we need a transition away from those problems. And so I talk in my book, the last third of my book is the argument that we're in a transition already to a third age of water, that a third age of water, meaning a sustainable future where we solve these problems, I argue is not only necessary, but I argue that it's possible and that that transition is underway. And so very quickly, let me outline sort of what I think about, how I think about this. And it's partly related to engineering, and it's partly related to ethics, and it's partly related to the whole way society thinks about water, which again, as Kyle and Mike said at the beginning, is connected to everything that we care about, which is part of the reason why I think it's become an important issue in the public debate. So I talk about the hard path for water, which is what I argue we did in the second age of water, and the soft path, which is what I argue we need to do to move to this more sustainable third age. And let me sort of quickly characterize it. The hard path was build for water supply. This was an engineering problem. Populations are growing, economies are growing. We have to find more water, build water supply, build more dams, build more pipelines, build more aqueducts, build more groundwater pumps to tap into groundwater and meet that assumption of ever growing demand. And that was the hard path. It was largely, frankly, an engineering path. I should mention this because Kyle didn't mention I have an engineering degree. I was trained as an undergraduate in engineering as well. And that was sort of what I learned. The soft path says, let's rethink what we mean by supply. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But there are alternative ways of thinking about the supply that don't require tapping into the natural environment and hurting the natural environment. And I'll come back to that. The hard path said build for projected demand. Again, this idea that demand will always grow. The soft path said let's rethink demand. How do we, what do we need water for? We need water to grow food. We need water to wash our clothes. We need water to take showers and wash our dishes. We need water to make the goods and services that we need. But is it possible to do the things that we want with less water? And basically, that's the idea of water conservation and efficiency. It's doing what we want more efficiently. And that's the idea of rethinking demand. And I'll talk a little more about that in a sec. The hard path says water is an economic good. The soft path said water is an economic good, but it's also a human right. And this is, again, part of the ethics, the new ethics of water. And in 2010, the UN declared a human right to water legally at the international level. And so, how do we balance this ethics of a human right to water? And maybe it's ethics that water is also an economic good. How do we balance those? But the hard path didn't do that balancing at all. The soft path has to. Again, the hard path said build centralized water treatment and produce one quality of water or or treat the water and then throw it away. The soft path says protect water quality, first of all, but then let's match the quality of supply to the quality of need. They're different. We're able to produce waters of lots of different qualities. Let's match the qualities with the supplies that are available to us. The hard path gave no thought to the environment and to ecosystems. We didn't care about the environment, or we didn't know the importance of the water we were taking out for our own uses on ecosystems. And that age has got to be over. And the soft path says we also have to protect ecosystem needs and ecosystem health. And the hard path says let's have centralized management. We have utilities, we have engineering solutions. The public is something we work to protect, but they don't participate that much in decision making. The soft path says we need different kinds of institutions. We need flexible water institutions. We need more community participation. This one water idea that you all are starting to talk about, that you heard about with an earlier intervention. We need institutions that think about not just water, but water and energy together, and water and energy and food together. And there's a great conversation in the water world going on about the water, energy, food, and I would probably add climate nexus, the integration of those issues. So this transition is happening. That's the good news. I think it's underway in lots of places, in lots of ways. We know we can meet basic human needs for water. I've talked about the UN's Sustainable Development Goals objectives. There's a lot of effort underway to do this. Much more is needed, but we can solve the problem of water poverty. We can use water far more efficiently. This is the demand side of the equation. 20 or 30 years ago, you flushed your toilet in the United States and it used 6 gallons. Today, the most efficient toilets use under 1 gallon per flush. And the truth is, today's they work better than the old ones because they've been engineered more carefully around water. And we have national standards and state standards about the efficiency of shower heads and washing machines and toilets and dishwashers that save water and save energy and save detergent. And that's the demand side. We want to get rid of our wastes. We want showers. We want clean clothes. And if we can do those things with less water and beneficially with less energy and with fewer greenhouse gas emissions, that's a new water ethic. We can have beautiful outdoor gardens that aren't lawns, especially in the Western United States, but that use much less water than Eastern lawns where water is not that big of a problem. That's the demand side of the equation. Agriculture, we know how to grow more food with less water. Again, this is the efficiency demand side of the equation. We know we have to grow food. We have a growing population. Can we do it with less impact on water resources by precision sprinklers, with drip irrigation, with different kinds of crops, with different kinds of soil moisture monitors so that we're watering crops at the right time, not just whenever water is available. And we're improving agricultural efficiency now. Again, that's the demand side of the equation. And as an example of the fact, I argue this transition is already underway. This is one of my favorite graphs. I show this almost every time I give a talk on water. This shows from 1900 to 2015 two things. In red, the US gross domestic product, which shows that ever increasing economy, which economists love to see, and we could talk about that, but it also shows water withdrawals. And so for the first part of the 20th century, as the economy grew, and I could have plotted population as well, as population grows, the use of water in the United States for everything grew as well. But in the late 1970s, something odd happened. These two curves split apart. And today in the United States, we use less water for everything, irrigation, power plant cooling, in our homes, in our industries, than we used in 1980. It's not what I was taught to expect in school. I was taught to expect that these two curves would continue to grow in lockstep, and that we would have to find more and more water on the supply side to meet that projection of infinitely growing demand. And we use much less water per capita than we used in 1980. This is the efficiency revolution. This is the ability to do what we want, to grow our economy, but not necessarily having to drain our aquifers and our rivers and our lakes anymore. And it's a sign that this transition to a new way of thinking about water and to a new age is already underway. This is the same thing for China. China's projecting the same thing. They're projecting a peak and then a decline in their water withdrawals. And we're already seeing this in Chinese water data. Part of it is that we have alternative sources of supply as well. Again, I heard this a little bit in the conversation at the beginning before my talk. We collect and treat wastewater. We can treat it to the purest standards possible. Traditionally, in the second age, we threw it away. But now we can reuse that water. Singapore reuses 100%, almost 100% of their wastewater. And some of that water is so pure, they use it in their semiconductor industry, which requires ultra pure water. California collects and treats and reuses about 20% of our wastewater now, and we're proposing to double and maybe triple that. Israel treats and reuses almost 100% of their wastewater, mostly for irrigation and agriculture. That's a new source of supply. It's a reliable source of supply, and it doesn't require draining our rivers and aquifers. Ultimately, we could desalinate water. We know how. The technology is available. 97% of the water on the planet is salt water in the oceans. It's too salty to drink. It's too salty to use to grow crops, but we know how to desalinate it. It's expensive. There are environmental challenges associated with that. But it's ultimately a new source of supply that again doesn't require overtapping our aquifers and draining our rivers. We know, again, ecosystems are valuable, and we're starting to restore ecosystems. This is the Elwha Dam in the Pacific Northwest. Was one of the biggest dams on the Elwha River, and it was until recently the biggest worldwide dam removal project. This is a picture of the dam, and this is what that river looks like now. And salmon are now spawning dozens of miles upstream of where that dam used to be. It was an old dam. It was unsafe. It was uneconomic. We took it down. And now there's a new dam removal project, four dams on the Klamath River shared between Oregon and California that are being removed to help restore the Klamath River, with the idea that ecosystems have a value, that fisheries have a value. And if we can get rid of the uneconomic or dangerous infrastructure of the second age of water, that's a new ethic. Restoring ecosystems is part of the new ethic. And let me close with this. There's an author named Sam Florman. Sam was a civil engineer. He was actually a family friend. I actually knew him quite well. And he wrote some books about engineering, called a book called The Civilized Engineer, another book called The Existential Pleasures of Engineering. They're wonderful little books. I really recommend that you dig them up somewhere. I'm not even sure they're still in print, but libraries have them. And here are a couple of quotes from The Civilized Engineer. Let me move this. Quote, often ethics is merely a question of emphasis rather than substance. For poets, clerics, ethicists, politicians, and educators, there are a variety of moral roads to be followed. For engineers, however, the one true road must pass through effectiveness and creativity, and the ideal starting place is conscientiousness. An engineer who starts out by being conscientious must end up by being honest. A conscientious engineer, by definition, cannot falsify test reports or intentionally overlook questionable data, cannot in any way evade the facts. It is the character and competence of individual engineers that will, in the end, make all the difference. And this is in the chapter Ethics, Credo for a New Age. And Sam loved to talk about engineering ethics. And we're in a world now where the vision for water is changing, and engineers have an absolutely critical role to play, but a broader role than in the second age of water when it was just build to provide for society. That was a wonderful objective, but now it's build for society, but understanding the human right to water, understanding the value of ecosystems, understanding the integration of water and energy and food and climate. And if that's what we do, then I'm convinced that the third age of water will be a positive one. And let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Peter, I mean, terrific start in terms of the work that we had ahead of us for the next couple of days. We have just a couple minutes, a question or two from folks, or comment about what Peter has offered in his provocation. Yeah.
How do you balance the removal of some of the infrastructure from the second? Should I go over?
No,
You'll
sorry,
have to
tell
speak
me.
up.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I can.
How do you balance removing some of the infrastructure from the second stage, such as the dams, with some of the other regulation or existing necessary infrastructure?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's a great question.
Can you
Um,
repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I can. How do you balance the removal of infrastructure like Klamath and others with the other regulatory and, existing infrastructure that we have? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because I should have made clear the soft path for water does not mean no large infrastructure, no engineering systems. We're dependent on them. We will always be dependent on them. There are places in the world that desperately need the kind of infrastructure that we already have here in the richer countries of the world. Part of it is going to be removing old infrastructure that's damaging or uneconomic. The big dams that are coming down now are not the Three Gorges Dam. It's not the big dams on the Columbia. It's the dams that are dangerous or really damaging ecologically. Those are the ones that are going to come down. And part of the transition to the third age of water means when we build new infrastructure, we have to think about ethics. We have to think about protecting communities. We have to think about protecting the environment. It's not simply build something to meet a human demand. It's going to be build something in a different way with consultation with the local communities, with understanding about ecological challenges and constraints. It's going to be a new way of thinking about infrastructure. So it's going to be a balancing act, a better balancing than we've done in the past.
Yeah, I think that word balance will probably be coming back to over the course of the 2 days. Thanks. Yeah, Brittany?
Yeah, question about how do you make a comprehensive analysis for the economics that were played out through each water age? And how do you make sense of that, or what do you think should be having conversations about now?
Yeah, another great question. I'm not an economist, although I've worked quite a bit with the economics world. Again, part of the failures of the second age of water was, in a sense, the way we dealt with economics. We underpriced water. We underpriced ecosystems. Ecosystems had no value in the 20th century. We underpriced meeting basic human needs for water and this issue of water poverty, in part because we didn't include the economic costs of not providing safe water and sanitation, the health costs of water-related diseases. The fact that in many developing countries, women and girls were responsible for collecting water when the basic water services weren't provided, and they couldn't go to school. And there was a huge educational failure. One of the things we've learned about water and sanitation is that when you provide water and sanitation in the developing world, it frees up girls and women to go to school or to enter the marketplace. And the economic benefits of that are huge. And they were never included in the evaluations in the 20th century. So, new thinking about the value of ecosystems, and there's a whole world of ecological economics now about trying to value ecology, uh, that as it improves, and it's not all the way there yet, will play an important role in moving toward this third age. Part of the reason why we're taking down these big dams when they're damaging ecosystems is because we're beginning to understand the value of salmon and healthy ecosystems for humans. It's not just for ecosystems' sake. Healthy ecosystems mean healthy humans. And that's, again, part of the failure of economics in the second age that hopefully we'll overcome in the third.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you very much for the talk as well as the questions. I mean, it really does set the stage, just wonderfully in terms of the work that we want to do in these 2 days. I will note, as you noted for folks, your background in terms of engineering, but also background in hydrologists and the other things. In one way, you're representative of the crowd that we speak to, or that we're working with, which we call the engineering community. We're not just about the future of engineers. It's about all of the people that are involved, if you will, in the stewardship of technology in the built and natural environment. And I love the fact that you've got a whole bunch of those hats on at the same time for us. So thank you very much this morning. And we'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you in other ways.
Thank you for the opportunity. As I'm sure you all know, water is so important and it touches on so many aspects of society and our lives. The fact that we're beginning to pay more and smarter attention to water is again, a positive sign for the future. So thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Peter.